Is this any better? Splendid. Well, thank you very much for joining us and the opportunity to rehearse what I was going to say as the opening. We're delighted you're with us. And it's at the start of a series of 3 panels this afternoon, all looking at human resources. This particular panel will be looking at the challenges of accessing and retaining talent. That will be followed by a second panel, which will be thinking about how does technology help shape the demand for talent? Can it help us address some of the challenges in supply? And then the third panel will look at, well, what does a non-exclusive relationship with talent look like? How do we engage, perhaps using the armed forces to access talent that it shares with other parties, including the commercial sector? So that's what we're going to be, that's the story we're going to be telling this afternoon. At the heart of this is a concern about a lack of access to the requisite talent, and I'm absolutely delighted that in this panel that is genuinely not the case. I'm joined by 4 fantastic panelists who will be talking about how organizations generally are struggling in what some people call the war for talent, others call a competition for skills, but this idea that there's a shortage of supply to deal with the challenges organizations are facing in the future. So of the 4 panelists, we're going to be hearing first of all from General Benoit Paris, who is the Deputy Director Human Resources for the French Ministry of Defense. He will be followed by Brigadier Mark Ackrill, who is the Head of People Strategy at the UK Ministry of Defence. And then we're going to hear from Ms. Lenaic Segalen, who is the Managing Director of the National Campus for Marine Industries, before we turn to Professor Emma Parry, who is a Professor of Human Resources at Cranfield University in the United Kingdom and does a lot of work on future talent with the Ministry of Defence. Now, I'm not going to do justice to their biographies, because if I were to do that, then there would be no opportunity for you to ask questions, and that's important. So if my panelists will excuse me for such a very brief introduction to you, then maybe we'll kick off and pose the first question to General Paris, which is, sir, I hear a lot from colleagues around the world about the challenge of access and retaining talent in the armed forces. What does that look like from the French perspective at the moment?
Thank you, Paul, for this question. It's, of course, a real challenge in France, like in many other countries, of course. I would like to begin by giving some characteristics of French MOD, French Armed Forces, human resources. First point, we are currently around a bit less than 310,000 people in the French MOD. That is to say 205,000 active military personnel, 40,000 reserve military personnel, and 63,000 civil servants. Second point, of course, our military personnel must meet so-called, I would say, youthful imperative. We need young people in the armed forces. That's the reason why 2/3 of our military people serve under a fixed-term contract, and that's very important for us. Third point, the MOD now is around 6,000 different jobs, 6,000 different professions. That's huge. I'm not sure there is any equivalent in France currently, and of course it's also a challenge for talent and talent and qualifications. It goes from the helicopter pilot to the tank driver, from the cyber fighter to the social worker, to the parachute commando, to the Navy missile operator, and so on, and so on, and so on. All these factors mean that we will be recruiting this year almost 40,000 people. That's huge. 40,000 people, that is to say 23,000 for the active military part of these people, 12,000 reservists. By the way, there is 1 reservist for every 2 active soldiers, and around 5,500 people for civil servants. Sorry. So that's the landscape. What is the context of the, let's say, the last 2 years? In 22, we had a very dynamic year for recruitment, and we exceeded our target of recruitment in 22. We had a target of 26 active, military and civilian people, and we almost reached 28,000. That's the question of retention, of course. In 23, the year was not so good in terms of recruitment, and with a lack of 2,500 people at the end of the year. We've been told that it was also the case in private companies. It was also the case in French administration, and we've been told that at the same time, we succeeded in recruiting 2,000 additional reservists. Yes, but we take the situation very seriously into account, and we cannot be comfortable with this situation. And that's the reason why, for a few months and the coming months and years, we will implement new measures in order to cope with the situation. The situation is, of course, and I should have begun by this point, the huge competition that we know currently on the French labor market, and huge competition of other administration, but above all, of course, of private companies. And so we consider that the first point on which we have to build, to build more, to be a more active and dynamic, is of course a very good image that the armed forces have in the French people, the French opinion, especially by the French young people. We have to better rely on this and to better, I would say, elaborate on that. We offer a wider range of jobs. To take an example, I would say that while armed forces will have in the long time military capabilities such as tanks, navy ships, aircraft, other functions such as logistic functions, supplies, health functions. There are also new capabilities that are being deployed in order to be enlarged and developed in order to act in cyberspace, to act in the space, on the field of information competition and things like that. So a new offer, a new type of jobs, and at the same time, I would say that the current jobs are themselves evolving due to technology. And that's another point that is very, I think, important in order to value our offer, is that the technology is everywhere in armed forces. It's very interesting also for our young people. A cutting-edge technological dimension on which also we have to perhaps better elaborate. Second point, which is very important, it's our very actively promoted gender equality policy. A class of age currently in France is around 800,000 young people. The middle of the two parts, equal parts of this class of age is of course composed of young men, but also of young women. And we have to be more effective on this specific field in order to better recruit women. Currently, French armed forces are the fourth feminized Western armed forces in the world. And we can do much better in this direction, this dimension, and we must do it. For example, currently you have female colonels at the head of army battalions, at the head of first-rank Navy ships, or commanding air and space force bases. So the doors are wide open to the recruitment of women in all our professions. In order to support this, recruitment offers are being enhanced by aligning them with more specific education programs, for example, through technological learning, technological education courses for young men and women just after the high school. We have offers for all the young people, whatever their level of the school level, their graduation, I would say, at the time when they're interested in it. And that's another very important point, I think. The armed forces are in situation to offer a second chance. A second chance for young people who had some, let's say, a bit difficult years at school. We have something for them. We also modernized our remuneration system in order to be also more attractive on this field. The wage in the French armed forces is composed of two parts. A part directly linked with the rank and seniority, and another part which depends on the qualifications, on the responsibilities, and also on the activities are carried out. And we renew this system in order to better reward acquisition of new skills and facilitate career paths, to better reward progressions in responsibilities also, and to better reward specific activities, operational activities, of course, but also other type of activities. And we developed some specific bonuses. And take an example: the specific bonus dedicated to facilitate, to motivate the contract renewals, and we doubled some of these bonuses last year in order to make sure in order to retain better our people. So we have a very dynamic and open career path, and each woman and man who chooses to join us, and it's deep conviction as a nugget. And we are to facilitate the development of this nugget and of this talent, and to facilitate also the acquisition of new talents through our education and training programs, through our offer of different jobs in a career path. I could mention other measures, I would say technical measures, but I just wanted to close, I mean, to this landscape, in order by mentioning a specific social support policy that we deployed some years ago, and we announced at the beginning of this year. That starts from the conviction that the sociologies of our armed forces have significantly changed in the last years. First point, as the vast majority of the French society, the spouses now work. The spouses have private jobs. And so we must better support them, for instance, the moving from one garrison to another one, in order to facilitate for them to find a new job when they move. Other example, there's a significant increase of couples of military, and in many times serving in different services, and also a significant increase of single parenthood. And we must, more than we did in the past, support this situation, this social situation, this, I mean, human being situation, social situation, in order to make them better feel in the armed forces, better feel in the MOD. And that's the aim of the so-called family plan number 2 that has started on January, which is built on 3 main axes. First axis is to simplify and strengthen the support for military mobility. I mentioned it about the work of the spouses, but we also must make like moving from one garrison to another is easier in terms also of housing, in order to help to find accommodation, for example. Second axis is to better take into account operational constraints, and I'm thinking about all the either the single parents or the military couples which have some problems sometimes to find places in nurseries for young children. And the third axis is to improve the daily life of family in the territories, in the garrisons, and especially in close cooperation with local civilian authorities and economic players. So that's a very strong policy, specific social policy, in order to support all the more, I would say, technical HR leverages that we develop. And I think that beyond all these points, some forces offer, above all, the uncommon possibility to integrate a group, a family, a collective, a team, and to allow people to engage themselves for a cause, for a meaning. We talked about the mean some minutes ago. That makes sense. The sense of commitment, of course, is strong, driven by shared values and the belief that collective success is achievable. We talked this morning in another panel about the youth currently in France, and how this youth wants to be given meaning, to engage in things that give them new opportunities, and to better feel in their commitments. And I think we have many things to tell to our young people today in France. We have to do it better, as we do, in direct relationships on the social medias, of course. So we have to increase our effort, but they are still very significant. And I think that we offer a unique human adventure, and on that we must keep on our effort, and convinced all the young people that there is a place and a perspective in the armed forces.
General, thank you very much for that. Brigadier Mark, I wonder what the situation looks like from the UK's perspective. Do you recognise what the General's been talking about?
Paul, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yep. So I absolutely recognise what General Paris is saying. As you would expect, our two nations, so close in societal values, so much shared military history, sometimes at opposite ends of the pike or the musket, but until recently, or now recently, with shared adversaries. Everything that General Paris has said sounds very familiar to me. So to answer the question, how does it look in the UK in this competition for retaining skills? There is a lot that we need to do, but we recognise that. We have a plan. and we know how we're going to tackle it. We don't know how that will turn out. So let me just back up a little bit, because I want to really amplify some of those points that General Paris mentioned, because I think they're so important. And the first one is the context. We are at war. Our values and our way of life are under threat, and are under threat daily. The rules-based world order is being competed in ways that we probably, as militaries, and certainly as societies, don't appreciate. And there is the first challenge that we have when we think about competing for skills and talent. Because how can you attract the talent and the skills you need if your society doesn't recognize what is happening for us here in Paris today, only several hundred kilometers away to our east? So that context is really important. The other reason why I think 2024 is such an important year to be discussing this most important of subjects is because it feels to me, exactly as the Général has said, that we're on a point of technology, of society's values, of generational shifts, and all these things are coming together in a way that means what we have done previously, even if you find ways to do it better, is probably still not going to solve the fundamental challenge that we have of trying to get the best women and men to serve in our armed forces and in our civil service. We're facing, in France and in the UK and across all Western countries, I believe, very similar demographic challenges. Our populations are aging. Our populations are choosing not to work. A recent headline in the UK stated that 21.8% of the working age population, so 16 to 64-year-olds, are choosing not to seek employment. We have more vacancies in the UK than we have unemployment. In other words, there are more jobs going, and yet people are not seeking those jobs. This is a really difficult challenge that we need to face. So there's the context. I think, as Général Paris has explained beautifully, what we need in terms of our workforce is also changing. The technical demand, the skills that don't exist in people of our age as much as they do in the younger people in the audience. Cyber, digital, nuclear, engineering. But the real challenge is those are the skills that society needs as well. So the marketplace is more competitive. And what we offer has to recognize that, but of course we can never compete against the private sector on its own terms. Again, we have to think of different ways to do it. So, because I want to keep this short, and I really would like to hear some questions as well, what are we doing about it in the UK? The first thing is we recognize it, and isn't that the most obvious but the most true thing to say, that you can't start to solve a problem unless you acknowledge it, and you acknowledge it openly. We talk openly about a burning platform in the UK in terms of our people. We do not have enough, we do not have the right skill sets, and we're not retaining them. So we have recognized that. In our most recent high-level policy, the Defence Command Paper Refreshed, which was published in June last year, the first chapter was entitled Our People. That is far more revolutionary than it sounds. I think most people in this audience would recognize militaries have a bias towards equipment and things and money and operations. To have your first chapter about people is brilliant. We're also very lucky in the UK in terms of our military workforce, because we had a very talented team headed up by a man called Rick Haythornthwaite, a mouthful even for an English native speaker, who produced a very thorough study last year that has given us our North Star, our aiming mark. It was brilliant because it looked at the system. It peeled back every single layer. It sought to understand what it is that motivates the young women and men that may join the armed forces, and how we can give them more meaning. And so that report produced 67 recommendations. They were all accepted by UK Defence, and we are now working very hard to understand how we deliver those things. It talks about spectrum of service, in other words, how you can move out of regular military into reserve, into the civil service, into industry, and then come back again, and move between those 4 points throughout your career in a way that suits you as an employee, and in a way that enriches us as employers, because we're sharing that knowledge. It talked about the total reward and those points that General Paris made about understanding what families need. We're not just engaging the military person, we're engaging their families. To start with, we have to attract them, and that often means engaging with their parents or their friends. So the total reward, we are never going to be able to pay a nuclear propulsion engineer as much as EDF will to work in a nuclear power station. But what we can do is give that incredibly talented young woman or man opportunities and challenges and experiences that she or he will not get anywhere else in the world. And there we can start to have conversations about Generation Z and what it is that motivates them. So these are the things that we're getting after. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a really important conversation to have in 2024. There's so much that we need to be doing. We need to understand data better. We need to listen to people better. I've had 2 brilliant sessions this morning. One was listening to General Paris in the roundtable he just mentioned, and the other was actually sitting for an hour in one of the classrooms here and listening to the people who really matter. And trust me, they are not, sadly, sitting on this panel. They are sitting in the audience, and they are the young folk who really understand what it is that appeals to them and motivates them. Don't ask us, I mean, please do ask us, but don't ask us what we think about the commitments of the young generation. Ask them. We have to listen to our employees and to the people that they care about to understand what it is so that we can win this war for talent and for skills. Thank you, Paul.
Brilliant, Mark. Thank you very much for that. Lenaic, coming at this from an industrial perspective, I wonder if what you've heard from the armed forces community is something that you recognise from your own industry perspective. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. My name is Lenaic Segalen. I've worked at CNAV for 3 years, and I'm a managing director of this non-profit organization. So I would like to start by giving you a quick overview of the maritime industries in France. This industrial sector includes the civilian and military naval industry, sailing, and offshore energies. At a national level, this field employed 140,000 people, and more importantly, will represent more than 10,000 recruitments a year up until 2030. In this context, having a qualified national workforce rooted in our key areas represents a major issue, as it is an absolute necessity for the development of the sector's company. This is why we created CNAV in 2017. This association brings together both public and private actors, among which 5 coastal regions, industrial companies, the French Navy, ministries, and other industrial partners. The organization's aim is to support the industry in terms of employment, training, and skills. For instance, 6 years ago, we identified only 15 short-staffed job profiles, whereas today there are twice as many, in a context where the job market in France is extremely tense. The affected jobs are mainly those of technician and blue-collar workers, such as boilmaker, welders, machine operator, technicians. But nowadays, there are also engineering jobs, especially in cybersecurity, nuclear, or software architects. The sector of maritime industries faces the same issue as the other industrial sector in terms of acquiring new talent, and it's also facing a certain lack of attractiveness. There are crucial stakes at play when it comes to drawing in new generations that are either unfamiliar with the sector's profession or that shy away from the industrial sector. Additionally, the negative perception which many have of the vocational route needs to be remedied. We need engineers, but we also need workers and technicians. For a long time, the vocational route in France has been linked to being professionally sidelined, and this is probably still the case in the minds of many parents and teachers. So our goal is therefore to shed light on the diversity of maritime jobs, less familiar to the public, and stimulate new career interest. We are not magicians. We cannot produce a miracle, but we have some ideas. So we have developed initiative tools that are specifically designed for new generations to talk about job, careers, training, and product. We go directly in the field to meet students in middle and high school, job seekers, as well as parents and teachers. We have, for instance, set up four new locations in areas emblematic in order to welcome visitors. They are located in Brest, La Seine-sur-Mer, Marseille, Rouen, and soon it will be in Saint-Nazaire and Cherbourg. Our initiative to promote our professions, generate an average of over 14,000 interactions a year and manage to inspire career interest in more than 30% for the young visitor and nearly 40% in the context of vocational retraining. We are, of course, also very active on social media like LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I also would like to highlight another major challenge, which is to promote the employment of women in our companies. To give you a few figures, in the marine industry, less than 25% of the workforce is made up of women. And if we have a look at blue-collar jobs in the naval industry, we are down to 6%. Even though all these jobs in the industry are in fact open to women. So we organize several events dedicated to women in order to show them that there is a place for them here with career options. We have also launched a series of videos of women who describe the career in the maritime industry. You can watch it on YouTube, Femmes et Industrie de la Mer. It's really nice. So there is still much to be done, but we have both the will and the energy to carry on and continue innovating. Furthermore, and it will be my last point, we have been able to develop training material that enhance existing content through the BICINAV certification label. This system of certification enables us to respond more effectively to industry requirements and also enhance the attractiveness of our industry's profession. These augmented training courses are given the label BICINAV certification, which is recognized by the French Ministry of Education, by the countrywide network of training organizations, and by the industry's company as a guarantee of the conformity of skills and expertise. Today, we have almost 200 certified training courses covering 30 short-staff professions in the industry. The number of trainees completing these courses will reach 2,000 this year. Furthermore, we support the teaching staff and instructor of these courses, who now number around 100, through a regional seminar, which has led to the creation of a new community of teacher and instructor. Looking to the future is indeed essential. CINAV has set up an annual industry-wide job and skill forecasting system which enable us to anticipate the skills that will be needed by our industrial partner and to measure and fill the gaps between recruitment needs and training opportunities. This approach allows us to first and foremost focus our efforts on the most short-staffed professions.
Thank you. You've spoken about more to be done. And I love the point you made about the supply chain, because we heard from General Paris and Brigadier Mark about the internal HR system. You're now talking about that much broader system of how does education feed the talent into the workforce itself. But I wondered if you could just say very briefly, just a few words on what you're seeing from industry outside, how they're adapting to the challenges that you've highlighted in reflecting on what General Paris and Brigadier Mark have said.
Sorry.
Sorry, having reflected on what General General Paris and Brigadier Mark. Sorry, Mark, I promoted you there. I'm sure it's a matter of time. They've talked about the internal challenges that they have. What have you seen from your industry partners about things that they're doing, this more to be done point that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that maybe it's your point. We have to face this issue of recruiting and retaining people, and it's really a main point for the industry because it has a direct effect on matters on sovereignty. So if we don't have the manpower to do the work, we won't be able to meet them. So now the new generation expect flexible work hours. They will have varied career paths and will focus on all the employer's goals and value align with their own. So we have to take it into account. And I think a new toolkit is needed to deal with those challenges for now, but also for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Emma, I want to turn to you now. Again, your perspective from outside defence, but looking into it, what are you seeing out there, and how would you reflect on the comments that you've heard from the armed forces members of the panel?
Okay, thanks, Paul. Let me just do the sound check. Good, thank you. Okay, so just to say, I think as we've heard, this is not just a military problem, and actually this is a long-term problem in terms of attracting and retaining the skills that organisations need. I've done some work recently that's really been forecasting some of these issues into the future, and the situation is not going to get better, I think it would be fair to say. So it is something that we need to deal with, just to give some doom to the room there. Really, and I think to summarise what some people have said, I think there are three issues going on here. Brigadier Mark did a fantastic job of talking about the context, but I just want to highlight three things. Firstly, we're seeing a massive increase in the demand for particular types of skills. Yes, the technical skills, as Mark said, but also the human skills, leadership skills, management skills. And while supply out of education is going up for some of these skills, the gap between demand and supply is getting bigger. So this is an ongoing problem. We're also seeing a general underskilling, if you like, of the workforce in terms of the softer skills, but also in terms of the basic digital skills. So we know that in around 10 years' time, the vast majority of the workforce in Europe will be underskilled in terms of digital and in terms of management skills. So there's a need to address this at both levels, actually. And then while I'm not a fan of the idea of generations, as Paul knows, I could see him chuckling over there, we do know that preferences and expectations around work are changing. And that means that what we do need to do is think about how our offer to those people changes as well. So I'm really pleased to hear what the General and the Brigadier were talking about there in terms of what the two ministries of defence are doing. I'm going to talk about what other organisations are doing before you ask me, Paul. I think there's a bit of an illusion that organisations are all throwing money at this issue. And that's not completely wrong, because we are seeing wages grow over and above the rate of inflation. But what we're also seeing in organisations that are successful is trying to deal with some of those softer aspects. So things that have been mentioned here, the need to provide development opportunities, the need to provide flexibility, not only in the way that people work, but also in relation to careers. We know that people don't want a linear career path where they stay in the same career path and the same profession their whole careers anymore. They want to be able to move, something that's quite challenging in the military, of course, that has quite fixed career paths typically. We know that people want more choice and control. They want a culture that's built on trust, that's built on relationships, that's built on inclusion, psychological safety, on equity. Again, something that at least externally, perhaps we don't always equate with military organisations. And they want a job that's really about meaning and purpose. And I think a couple of the speakers have already alluded to that, and the General talked about values. So as the last speaker, and no one can argue with me immediately, at least, I just want to, I guess, throw a little bit of challenge back, certainly in relation to the Haythornthwaite proposals, which I'm more familiar with, I will admit, than what's going on in the French defence forces. But in both cases, I think this is a step in the right place, but I think I have a few concerns or a few challenges as to whether this is enough. So firstly, certainly in relation to Haythornthwaite, sorry, Mark, you know, I have a real question about how this is going to be implemented and whether we're going to manage in the UK to implement this. I've been around long enough to see things like the new employment model that had some similar ideas. So I think there's a couple of concerns that I would have in relation to how successful this will be. Firstly is around something that I've already mentioned, around culture. Because some of these ideas around flexibility, around choice and control, around inclusion, really require a deeper change in culture, and that's very, very challenging. Because actually culture within the military is important in terms of, you know, when we do go into conflict, especially an extended conflict, to hold people together. So how do we balance that tension between needing to maintain a culture but needing to change it? That would be a question to you. Two more very brief points and then I will move on, Paul. Firstly, I think we can change the offer completely, but research that I've done, several pieces of research that I've done with the UK Armed Forces, shows that actually society has a really, really low awareness and understanding of what a military career looks like. You know, they see it very stereotypically as army, as infantry in UK terms, you know, and don't really understand what it means and what a career offers now. So I think there's another challenge in terms of how we build relationships and awareness and understanding with society in order to bring people in. And then the final question, I guess, that I would ask is, will this be enough? You know, because we're really, in a way, playing catch up with what the commercial organisations are doing. And actually, should this be a competition for skills, or should we be thinking about how we can better develop partnerships with industry, how we can better make use of people like the reserve forces that have a foot in industry and in military organisations, you know, and address these challenges in another way. So, you know, moving away from competition to collaboration, perhaps.
Emma, thank you very much, and a nice trail for the third panel. I just wonder, Mark, General, any responses you want to make in terms of that? Because Emma posed some questions. I was hoping to go to the audience for questions. It's unusual for the panel to pose questions to itself, but fantastic you've done so.
I like an opportunity to challenge, you know that, Paul.
I know that.
Well, I might take the first couple on Haythornthwaite, because that would be unfair to ask General Paris to deal with that. But I think some of those points about culture and would it be enough, General, you and I could have a really good retort to that. So firstly, on Haythornthwaite, and I can't see how many Brits there are in the room, but I'll try not to make this too British, but there's a very specific example that Emma was referring to there that I think is worth just 30 seconds to explain. So I believe, like most Western nations, the British Armed Forces offer accommodation, subsidised accommodation to their workforce. And it's a very old model. Exactly as Général Paris said, it is based in the 1950s, presumes that the spouse, A, is female, B, is there's a marriage there, and C, is non-working. And this is clearly not appropriate for the 21st century. So in the last 7 years, we've been trying a different model. It was going to roll out 2 days ago, and it got stopped. And it got stopped in a very public way, because a very small percentage that would be affected, and these are that traditional female spouses of army officers who are used to a life of moving around, and as they progress, as their husbands invariably take on greater responsibility, they get larger houses, the model that said, hold on a second, let's give you accommodation based on your need, not on your entitlement, an awful, awful phrase, or your status. For these people, that was too much change. So, we'll back away from that unless you want to ask more on it. But for me, the important lesson for this audience is, how do you deliver really deep-rooted systemic change for your workforce when there is tension between that which you need as an institution, which is all great and can be agreed, this is all being as productive as we can be, able to bring our nation's arms to bear against an adversary, but hold on a second, this now matters to me personally. I've now got to go home this evening and explain to my family why things are going to be different. I'm going to get paid less, we're going to move more, we're going to move less, we're going to move to a smaller house. So there's a real tension there. I think the answer, because it's a really fair challenge, Emma, is don't do big change. Don't start, for those of us that have been out in the field and marched on compass bearings, don't set your compass bearing and march on that for 7 years and think you're going to arrive at the destination you thought you were going to arrive at. Things change. People's expectations change. The team were very responsive that led this change, and they listened, but there was just a cohort they hadn't recognized. So the better way to do it, and what we're trying with Haythorne Thwaite, is incremental change. Do a little bit, see how it feels. You've got to have a good theory of change. You've got to use data, and you've got to work out if that's having the effect that you want, and then you go a bound further. And you've got to constantly be responding. And that's very different to the way we've done it in the military. I think it would be recognized more in industry because the way that industry can be much more responsive. So that's point one. The second point about culture, I think, is a really important one. We were talking at lunch, a beautiful lunch, by the way. Thank you. And I expect that the French military have lunch like that every single day. But I think those of us that come from nuclear families, so a traditional family, would recognize that a strong family eats together. It's increasingly challenging in the 21st century, but a strong family will sit down in the evening and will dine together. And we have recognized that the way we used to feed our soldiers and sailors and aviators doesn't work because the quality of food, I think, in France and certainly in the UK, is very poor. That we want to give these young women and men more choice, and they are choosing to go back and eat, pay for their own food and go and eat by themselves. We haven't thought through the whole system, so we invite them to do this in accommodation where there is no kitchen, one hot plate, a microwave somewhere, so they're not cooking them good food, and they're not eating together. And what then happens when they go to war? Because that's what matters. That's our competitive marketplace. When we pick up arms and fight on behalf of our nation. And how well connected are those women and men if they've not dined together, if their accommodation is now spared, if they're encouraged to buy their own houses. I'm not saying any of these things are wrong. I'm just saying that there are some serious consequences that I don't think we can think through, but I think we've got to be prepared to deal with those consequences. Fair challenges, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoit. General.
Yeah, thank you. Emma, I fully share your view on one of the main paradoxes we have to deal with is, if you agree, I would sum up this way, from the single person to the group. The single person now is much more important than it used to be, and we have to deal with that, with this reality. And so that's the question, I think, of the ways. I would talk about support policy. I explain. I think at the early beginning of the first contact with the armed forces, we have to take more care than we did in the past of the progression, of a progressive enter in good French, onboarding phase, on which we must be much more careful than we used to be in the past. Because all normal things are not normal, or so-called normal things are not normal anymore. And that's first, of course, the first challenge, since at the end, we can consider that in terms of operational effects, operational activities, business is the same, more or less. So first point. And for that, better make know, make understand, make support by these people. And in the long term, I've talked about our family plan, but it's also better support people, help people to find their way in all the possibly career paths, the possible job we can offer to them, and they don't know. And we must also develop, we do it currently, we are working on that, develop new possibilities, new tools, in order to help people to project themselves, sometimes in the same jobs, and sometimes in very different perspectives, giving them the opportunity to be educated and trained on these potential new fields of activity. And I think it's a very strong curve we have to conduct, and we're working on this already, but of course there's much to be done, as you said, and it's a very key issue, I think, for retention, our retention policy. The other point is the deep change that will be led by the development of the reserve by the end of this decade. We must double the number of the strength of reservists. That is to say, a new type of contact with the civilian society, with the private companies, a new type of skills, qualifications in the French armed forces, and of course, new type of relationships. We are more transactional way. I don't know if the British language accepts this term. Yes, thank you very much. Transactional relationships that used to be in the past. And this is also one thing on which we are working on, and on which we must still progress also.
Thank you. Lenaic, could I ask you to be very brief, please? Because I'm getting hate looks from the corner.
Very brief.
A lot of pressure on us, and I will have to conclude this first panel and to switch on the second one, because we need to start the second panel. So if you, in the assistance, have a question coming, please keep it for the end of the second panel, because we will be back on timing for sure. And so I thank you very much. I apologize for this, but we have to stay on schedule because people have meetings everywhere and need to be able to connect. So thank you very much. And we start...